even if Harry and Meghan right now are earning their own money, that well is drying up. You've got to take the ability for them to damage the royal family in the future away, and you've got to do that now. You've got to do it swiftly.
Princess Lilibet Diana had been christened. Why would they use a title for their children that represents an institution they loathe so much?
This case about whether you think the birth was real, whether you think there was a surrogate, whether you think Meghan was wearing a moon bump. The fact is, Harry and Meghan lied. Buckingham Palace lied on their behalf. There was a complete cover-up over the birth of Prince.
Something doesn't add up, and the more you stare at it, the louder that silence becomes. Because what if Buckingham Palace wasn't silent out of weakness, but strategy? What if this entire situation, every interview, every headline, every emotional revelation was being watched, recorded, and quietly countered in a way nobody saw coming? Harry and Meghan stepped away claiming they wanted peace, privacy, a normal life for their children. That was the story. Clean, simple, almost too perfect. But then the contradictions started stacking. Interviews dropped. Documentaries exploded across global platforms. Personal stories became public currency. And suddenly, that quiet life didn't look so quiet anymore. It looked calculated. It looked deliberate. And people started asking the uncomfortable question: was this ever about privacy or control? Because here's where things twist. On one side, there's the narrative: protect Archie and Lilibet from the spotlight. On the other side, their names keep resurfacing at the center of global attention. That contradiction, it doesn't just confuse people, it raises suspicion. And while the world debated, speculated, argued, the palace did nothing. No emotional response, no dramatic denial, just silence. But not the kind of silence that fades away, the kind that builds pressure, the kind that shapes outcomes behind closed doors. Because in that world, silence isn't absence, it's power. And that power, it was slowly, quietly redefining where those children stand in royal history without ever saying a word.
She was never pregnant at all. Instead, the videos embolden conspiracy theorists. They're calling it Megspiracy, and the pair are being subjected to yet more merciless ridicule.
With either Archie or Lily, and it needs to happen. They need to prove that those children, Meghan and Harry, are not entitled to privacy in this matter. And their privacy is trumped by our right to know that no bastard is going to sit on the throne of this country.
Harry and Meghan Markle's surrogacy scandal has entered the mainstream media domain.
Now here's where it gets deeper, darker even, because this isn't just modern drama, it's history. A system built over 100 years ago, locked in place long before Harry or Meghan were even born. And that system, it doesn't bend. It doesn't adjust for emotions, popularity, or media pressure. Back in 1917, rules were written, cold, precise, unchangeable. Letters patent. Sounds harmless, right? But inside that document is a rigid framework that decides everything. Who gets a title? Who belongs? Who doesn't? No exceptions, no shortcuts. Royal blood, officially recorded birth, and a formal connection to the Church of England. Miss even one piece, and the system doesn't recognize you the same way. That's not opinion. That's structure. And here's the unsettling part. What if Harry and Meghan thought visibility could override that system? That influence, global attention, and public sympathy could somehow shift rules that have survived wars, scandals, and centuries of pressure. Because if they believed that, then they were already playing a game where the outcome was decided long before they made their first move.
Yeah, nobody set out to destroy you. You destroyed yourselves in this country with your ludicrous, hypocritical behaviour. The truth be told, what you just said is complete and utter garbage by the British media, the public, and the royal family that they've all now abandoned. That's the truth.
That it just really kind of boggles the mind. I mean, just for titles, for example. So when Archie was first born, they said they didn't want him to have a title. He was going to be a private citizen. I was like, bravo, you understand. He's not going to be a working member of the royal family. He is going to have to live a normal life, get a normal job. That is fantastic. And then it came out later in the Oprah Winfrey interview. Well, they denied him a title and security because he is a mixed race child. And then it was kind of like...
Think about it carefully. This system wasn't designed for fairness. It was designed for control. Without it, chaos. Anyone with the slightest connection could claim status, titles, power. And the monarchy? It survives because it doesn't allow that chaos. It survives because it refuses to bend. And that's the part people miss. While the world reacts emotionally, the institution responds mechanically. No feelings, no reactions, just rules. And once those rules are triggered, everything else falls into place automatically, like dominoes. So when Harry and Meghan stepped out, it wasn't just a personal decision. It was a structural shift. And maybe they didn't realize just how deep those consequences would go until it was already too late.
Meghan Markle gave birth to Lily because this is what's called plausible deniability. They want to be able to say, hey, we never claimed that she was our daughter in that announcement. They're legally covering their backs. There's just too many unknowns. And then, of course, we have that the doctor that allegedly delivered Lily quit her practice 2 weeks after giving birth to Lily or delivering Lily. That sentence there is missing. That is a vital sentence that Meghan Markle chose not to put in an official statement because she knows she would get into a lot of legal trouble and she needed plausible deniability.
This crisis won't die down until the irrefutable truth comes out.
Harry and Meghan playing games that resulted in people unnecessarily questioning things. Again, every toxicity thing is result of them.
Then came Archie, May 2019, a moment that should have been flawless, traditional, perfectly aligned with royal history. And at first, it looked exactly like that. The announcement, the photos, the global celebration. But then something small changed, quietly, almost invisibly. And that's where the alarm bells started ringing. Because in a system where every detail is controlled, even the smallest deviation stands out like a crack in glass. Archie's birth certificate altered, not adjusted casually, but changed in a way that broke pattern. Meghan's name removed, replaced with a title. That's not standard, that's not tradition, that's something else. And suddenly, questions weren't just whispers anymore, they were everywhere. Why change it? Who requested it? Was it symbolic or strategic? Because birth certificates in that world aren't just documents, they're foundations. Permanent records that define position, identity, legitimacy. You don't rewrite them without reason. And the most unsettling part, no explanation ever came, just silence again. But this time, it felt heavier, intentional, like something was being adjusted behind the scenes while the world focused on headlines. And if Archie's situation raised eyebrows, Lilibet's arrival didn't just raise questions, it shattered expectations. A birth in California, no formal palace announcement, no traditional acknowledgement, just a private release. Clean, simple, detached. But in royal terms, that's not normal. That's a break from pattern, a disruption, because every royal birth before followed a script, announcements, recognition, documentation. But this felt different, almost like a line was being drawn without anyone saying it out loud. And that's where the tension starts building. Because when a system that thrives on precision suddenly goes quiet, it's not because nothing is happening. It's because everything is. And the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes, this wasn't chaos. This was control. Slow, calculated, unshakable. And the real question isn't what happened. It's when it was decided. And just when it seemed like the situation couldn't get any more complicated, it did. Because what people saw on the surface, happy announcements, carefully released photos, controlled narratives, was only half the story. Underneath, something far more rigid was unfolding. A system quietly asserting itself, not through public confrontation, but through documentation, procedure, and absence. And that absence? It was louder than any statement Buckingham Palace could have made. Because here's the part that makes everything feel almost calculated. When Lilibet was born in June 2021, the reaction wasn't explosive, it was restrained. No grand palace bulletin, no ceremonial acknowledgement tied into the traditional royal system. And that deviation wasn't random. In a structure where every royal birth is historically stamped into an unbroken chain of records, this felt like a break in continuity. Not dramatic, not emotional, just missing. And in that world, missing pieces aren't accidents, they're signals. Then came the baptism. Now, in royal terms, this isn't just a family milestone, it's a formal entry point. A moment where a child is not only welcomed spiritually, but officially tied into the institution through the Church of England. It's documentation, ceremony, and recognition wrapped into one. And for generations, every royal child followed that path, becoming part of a lineage that stretches back centuries. But here, the baptism happened, just not in the way the system recognizes. Held in California, private, personal, meaningful to the family, but not recorded in the official Church of England record. records. And that single missing connection, it changes everything. Because suddenly, the pattern is broken again. Not loudly, not aggressively, just enough to stand out. And when patterns break in a system built entirely on consistency, people start connecting dots. Was this separation intentional? Was it inevitable? Or was it the result of decisions made years earlier that quietly set this entire outcome into motion? Now step back and look at the bigger picture, because this is where it gets almost unsettling. Everything Harry and Meghan built after stepping away, the interviews, the documentaries, the global deals, it all rests on one central idea: their connection to the royal family. That connection is the story. It's the foundation. It's what gives everything weight. But what happens when that foundation starts shifting? When the institution itself begins creating distance, not through confrontation, but through silence and structure? Because that's exactly what this feels like. Not rejection, not retaliation, just separation. Clean, precise, undeniable. And the moment that separation becomes official on paper, in records and documentation, it stops being speculation. It becomes reality. And that reality, it changes perception fast. Because now, instead of being seen as insiders choosing a different path, it starts to look like something else entirely. A transition from being part of the system to operating outside of it. And those are two very different positions. One carries influence from within. The other relies on connection from the past. And when that shift happens, everything attached to that identity starts to feel different. The voice, the narrative, the authority, it all begins to change. And for Harry, this isn't just structural, it's personal, because this is the world he was born into, the system that shaped his identity, his role, his entire understanding of belonging. And now he's watching his own children exist outside of that framework, not because of a single moment, but because of a series of decisions, rules, and responses that were never going to bend in the first place. And here's where the tension tightens even more. Reports suggest he tried. Quiet conversations, attempts to find middle ground, a way to keep his children connected while still living a different life. But every attempt ran into the same wall. The system doesn't adjust. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't adapt based on individual situations. It follows structure, always. And that's the part that feels almost cold, because no matter how personal the situation becomes, the response remains the same, consistent, unmoving, final. Then, without fanfare, without dramatic headlines, it happened. Everything that had been slowly building behind the scenes became official, documented, locked in, not through a press conference or a public statement, but through records, the one thing that carries the most weight in that world. And once something is written into those records, it doesn't shift. It doesn't get revisited casually. It stays. And just like that, the speculation ended. Archie and Lilibet's positions weren't just being debated anymore, they were defined, not part of the formal royal structure in the same way as other royal children, not placed within the same ongoing institutional framework, still connected by family, by blood, by history, but not by the system itself. And that distinction, it's subtle, but it changes everything, because now the narrative splits into two realities. Publicly, they remain figures of global interest, growing up surrounded by opportunity, attention, and influence. But institutionally, they exist outside the core structure that defines royal continuity. And that divide isn't temporary. It's structural. And maybe the most fascinating part of all of this is how quietly it happened. No explosive confrontation, no dramatic fallout, just a series of precise moves, documented decisions, and strategic silence that slowly reshaped everything. Because in that world, power doesn't always speak. Sometimes it just writes things down. And once it's written, it's final, which leaves one question hanging in the air, unresolved and impossible to ignore. Was there ever truly a chance for both sides to meet in the middle, or was this outcome set in motion long before anyone realized what was really happening?